Welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Dr. Vishal Jadhav, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today we are going to look at the module called Europe, Enlightenment and the Framing of Sociological Thought. This module is a part of classical sociological theory. In this module, we will be looking at how the whole history of science and rationality emerged in Europe, how the Renaissance period and how the value systems changed in so-called modern Europe. This transition from the pre-modern to the modern society entailed that the pre-modern institutions such as religion, kinship, family and other social institutions underwent tremendous change, but it also meant that a new reasoning took the place of the earlier perspectives and earlier formulations that were in place. Now, science became the way of understanding society. As Descartes puts it, cogito ergo sum, that is, we think, therefore we are, and from here on, science begins to be the methodology of understanding social reality. In doing this, this module attempts to also understand how sociology as a science emerged in Europe. History is a window to understanding the contemporary society. It is an interaction between the present and the past. It is a tool that helps one understand the events of the present in a much more nuanced and lucid manner. An understanding of the key ideas and the fundamental concepts of modern sociological thought therefore requires a prior thorough understanding of the historical conditions of the birth of this social science discipline. Therefore, in this module we will be examining the conditions that led to the germination of sociology as a social science discipline. We will be attempting to answer a whole bunch of questions as to what were the key social and political situations that set in motion the ideas which inspired some of the classical thinkers of sociology. Who were the leading thinkers of that time? Which brand of dominant intellectuals' tendencies of that time did they subscribe to? We will be examining the impact of enlightenment on modern European thought. At the same time, we would also be looking at the role played by Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution in shaping the undercurrents of sociological thought. In doing all this, we will be primarily looking at some of the precursors to the three founding figures of sociology, namely Emile Durkheim, Karl Marx and Max Weber, and will be assessing how the former inspired the later. Enlightenment era, the age of reason. While there existed no sociology during the Enlightenment era, the roots of sociology can be traced back to this epoch, for this period was not impervious to sociological speculation. This was a time characterized by the dwindling ecclesiastical authority which marked the Middle Ages. It was a time when the authority of the church was questioned and there was an eclipse of the metaphysical systems of thought that were a mark of the earlier century. Philosophers and scientists became in this century the modern priests, and science was the universal faith, the new religion. This was a time of a critical bent of mind, a bent which was open to discovery and which was cherished the importance of statements corroborated by empirical evidences. Such a form of understanding resulted in the questioning of the prevalent notions and rung in an era characterized by questioning of belief. Such a practice was often adopted for some of the ideas advocated by the church. Therefore, it is hardly a surprise that these thinkers waged a persistent war against superstition and bigotry in their efforts to secularize ethics. The first in the series of attacks on Christian thought of the medieval era can be traced back to the publication of On the Revolution of the Celestial Orbs in 1543 by Copernicus. What is particularly striking about this work is the dethronement of the earth from its position at the center of the universe. This heliocentric theory debunked the prevalent notion that it was the earth which enjoyed its position at the center of the universe and conferred this position on the sun. The discovery was also made about the motion of the earth, a diurnal rotation accompanied by an annual revolution around the sun. Since such a view was not in tandem with the priestly view, which assigned an important role to man in this cosmic universe, there was a delay in the publication of this text. The second scathing wound to celestial authority came from Kepler. His major contribution to science came in the form of his 3 laws governing planetary motion, which dismantled the existing prejudices and biases of the day. For instance, the facts that planets had elliptical orbits led to relinquishment of the aesthetic bias which favored circles. The third serious attack came from Galileo. It was Galileo who exposed the importance of acceleration. It was he who formulated the law of free falling bodies and anticipated Newton's first law of motion. He is also associated with the law of inertia, and he also made some startling observations in the field of astronomy. For instance, it was he who discovered the satellites of Jupiter. Finally came Newton, who formulated the 3 laws of motion, talked about force, and enunciated law of universal gravitation. In fact, it is in this context that Russell states, in History of Western Philosophy, nature and nature's law lay hid in night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light. All these developments went a long way in changing the outlook in the educated man. It ignited within him the virtue of truth, the power of reason, and the belief in progress. All 3 notions were secular and rational. Thus, 4 key propositions emerged from enlightenment, which have been clearly formulated by Robert Bursted. There was first of all the replacement of the supernatural by the natural, of religion by science, of divine decree by natural law, and of priest by philosophers. Second was the exaltation of reason guided by experience as the instrument that would solve all problems, whether social, political, or even religious. Third was the belief in the progress of the human race. And finally, there was humane and humanitarian regard for the rights of man, and especially the right to be free from the oppression and corruption of governments, a right claimed in blood in French Revolution. The 2 monumental forces, the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. The revolution did not just happen in the field of science, there were other political and social revolutions too that form part of that time. Thus, there was a revolution for democracy which brought about the French Revolution. The second major turning point is the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century. These have been brought forth by Robert Nisbet in the sociological tradition. The French Revolution. The French Revolution was a clear ideological break from the ideas of preceding century. This is manifest in some of the things that happened during this time. Thus, this revolution, which erupted in 1789, ushered in a new social order. The principles of liberty, equality, and freedom became the overarching principles of this order. It attempted to put an end to human suffering and was the harbinger of equality in that it put an end to the exploitative feudal structure which characterized the medieval France. At the same time, this revolution gave to man the freedom to practice any occupation, a freedom which was the aftermath of the abolition of trade, corporations, and guilds. There was also a fundamental change in the family system. It was now possible to give divorce. Paternal power became limited in scope and power. It became mandatory for the father to pass on his property to his children. The revolution also had an impact upon religion. There was a separation of state and religion. The property of the church was confiscated by the state, but most importantly, France saw a transition from being a monarchy to being a democracy. The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, which took place in England between 1760 to 1840, brought about the process of transition in England from an economy dominated primarily by agriculture and handicrafts to an economy dominated mainly by industry and machine. Everything was revolutionized, right from the materials used for production to the tools used for production to the strategies to organize production. Consequently, there grew a new class of workers who were mostly deprived of the fruits of their labor, were exploited by their employers, and who led a deplorable life in a state of perpetual property. At the same time, land, which was so important in the feudal era, lost its importance to capital. It acquired the virtue of being merely a factor of production. This was also a time of loss of a sense of community. The individual was isolated and alienated from his fellows. Therefore, this was a time of growing individualization. This was a major concomitant of urbanism as a way of life. The impact of developments of enlightenment on the precursors to sociological thought. The French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, together with the scientific revolution of the Enlightenment period, gave further impetus to the development of sociological thought. This can be attributed to the growth of a few key themes and ideas which captured the attention of the thinkers, hailing from three brands of social thought, namely the liberals, the radicals, and the conservatives. The Industrial Revolution too was equally inspiring and managed to catapult the attention of these branches of scholars to various themes. Thus, for instance, the appalling condition in which the working class found itself indubitably interested the radicals and the conservatives. Scholars like Bonnard, Hegel, and Marx commented about the weakening of the roots of traditional structures and institutions such as the village, the guild, and the family. Marx became, in this schema, the prophet of the view concerning the ills of capitalist society and offered a detailed description in his Communist Manifesto of the change that were entailed by the onset of capitalism, how it shook the existing social structure and social relations under its sway. The conservatives and radicals were also similar in that they noted how technology and factory system combined to entail a change in the relations between man and women, and how they posed a threat to the traditional family. But this unity in the conservative and radical views ceased to exist when it came to the matters of property. While the conservatives saw in property the remnants of a tradition characterized by family, the church, and the state, the radicals advocated the abolition of private property. Interestingly though, the conservatives and the radicals alike had distaste for large-scale industrial property. The affinity between these two schools of thought also extended to the distrust that they had towards industrial capital. However, unlike the conservatives, for whom it was the very character of this kind of capital to produce alienation, for the radicals it was the prerequisite to the development of socialism. The city of Manchester became the archetype of the emerging reactions from these two schools to the new industrial order. Both conservatives and radicals loathed urbanism. However, such abhorrence on the part of the radicals was only half-hearted, so much so that it is urban in its mentality. Thus, for thinkers like Marx, the advent of urbanism was one of the blessings of capitalism. Empowered with this basic understanding, the time is ripe to look at the works of some of the precursors to sociological thought. Montesquieu, who is famous as being the subject of Durkheim's doctoral theses, is a French thinker. Individual, according to him, is merely an instrument of the general movement. His interests in laws, family, marriage, suicide, manners, climate, religion, human relations, and so forth had a sociological character. Furthermore, he utilized comparative method to study various social institutions. Edmund Burke was a seminal figure of the conservative tradition who believed that if French Revolution was allowed to blossom fully, it could destroy the whole of Europe. He offered a historical and organic conception of society. His view on the state and nation became an inspiration for Hegel, who attempted to bring together conservative concept of historical development with enlightenment's plea for reason. Immanuel Kant, in Critique of Pure Reason, comes up with transcendental philosophy. In his work, he distinguishes between a priori cognition, which are independent of experience, and posterior cognitions, which derive from experience. He also disaggregated those judgments which are analytic, the judgments of clarification, from those that are synthetic, the judgments of amplification. He thus formulates transcendental philosophy, or the philosophy of speculative reason. These ideas influenced Max Weber, who hails from the Neo-Kantian tradition. Jacques Rousseau is associated with Romanticism. His work touched upon the themes of education, forms of inequality, physical and moral, and entertainment. His concept of the general will bears a close resemblance with Durkheim's conscience collective. René Descartes had a crucial role in shaping the rational philosophy. Descartes, in his Meditations on First Philosophy, comes up with his method of Cartesian doubt. He doubts everything, even his own very existence. He also argues that there exists a difference between the mind and the body. He concludes that it is our senses that deceive us, and therefore we should only trust a mind if we are to liberate ourselves from biases and prejudices. Thus, we can see in Cartesian philosophy the seeds of some of the ideas, such as the need to emancipate one from prejudices, which forms the crux of positive thought. Another thinker who inspired the scientific method was John Locke. He was of the opinion that at the time of the birth, the mind is a blank slate, or tabula rasa. It is only through experience that ideas enter our mind. Thus, this idea formed the pillar of empirical methods. These ideas were taken one step further by David Hume, making an analytical distinction between impression and ideas. Hume urged that it is the impressions derived from experiences which precede our ideas. Adam Ferguson was of the opinion that the study of mankind is essentially the study of groups. Further, the study of society must be independent of conjectures and speculations. It should rely instead on observations. He identified three stages of social change: savage, barbarous, and polished. In this context, he also identified the pros and cons of division of labor. He was not a big fan of organic analogy. He argued that conflict is useful and, in fact, a social necessity. For Louis de Bonald, all forms of knowledge are social products. Like Descartes, ideas for him are innate, but they are embedded in society and not the agency. Instead of the concept of the man being a natural being, he propagated the view of man being a social creature, who is observed into the society by the acquisition of its culture. Like Durkheim, he wanted to demonstrate how society had divine origins. He believed in the institutions of family, church, and the state. Furthermore, he adopted a critical stance about the bourgeoisie industrial society. Like Bonald, Joseph de Maistre offered a polemic on enlightenment. He too believed that man was a social being. It is hence hardly a surprise that Joseph was perturbed by Rousseau's immoral character of man's natural life. He believed that the various aspects of culture fulfilled social functions. Saint Simon, along with Comte, is regarded as the official founder of sociology. In fact, both the writers were influenced by de Bonald. He is sometimes also regarded as the founder of socialism. According to him, it was the universal acceptance of religion which led to the stability of the medieval era. He took upon himself the task of studying the new social order in which science supplanted religion. This was also to be the subject matter of his social physiology. He believed that albeit the new elements of this social order may be conflicting, they are the different parts of the whole. Auguste Comte famously gave his law of three stages about the progress of society, from the theological stage to the metaphysical stage to the positive stage. He believed that his social physics would establish order out of chaos. Unlike other conservatives, Comte was not at all critical of enlightenment. This explains why he thought that social dynamics owes as much to enlightenment thinkers as social statics owes to post-revolutionary conservatives. With him, we see the advent of proper sociology, enlightenment and classical sociology. The spark of sociological thought was ignited by the Enlightenment era, the age of reason, which through the scientific revolution that is set forth led to many startling revelations by the likes of Copernicus and Newton. A domino effect of this was the shattering of various prejudices and the weakening of the authority of church. However, these changes were not just confined to the domain of science. There was a revolution for democracy too. The French Revolution was another major blow to the clerical authority, for it entailed the confiscation of church property and separation of religion from the matters of the state. The family too underwent a significant change. This was accompanied by a change in the political system. There was a cry for freedom, equality, and liberty. Monarchy succumbed to democracy. This phase also saw the demise of feudalism. Capitalism was one of the concomitants of the Industrial Revolution. The revolution catalyzed a series of changes such as declining status of worker, the growing urbanism, loss of tradition, the changes brought about, the technological systems, all invited the attention of the thinkers of that time. Radicals and conservatives equally commented upon these themes. But most importantly, this is the time when some of the ideas which were to form the base of the classical sociological tradition of Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim and Max Weber were laid down. Taking a cue from these Enlightenment ideas in the existing socio-political and economic situations of the time, these three key figures went on to establish various sociological traditions. Thus, for instance, Marx became the proponent of conflict school, which was carried forward by scholars such as Ludwig Plowicz, Letzer F. Ward. Thus, for instance, Marx became the proponent of conflict school. Durkheim became one of the founders of functionalist tradition, which was carried forward by scholars like Talcott Parsons and R.K. Merton, and the interpretativist tradition carried forward by theorists like Alfred Schutz. Furthermore, there were commentaries on the Industrial Revolution, a theme very dear to the heart of Karl Marx. This was also a time, as we saw above, where comparisons between societies were made. Different routes to a value-free study were being devised. There was also a concern for social order, and the importance of society over the group was being realized. All these themes form the backbone of Durkheimian sociology. Finally, as mentioned above, Weber's idea of authority can be traced back to the French Revolution. He was deeply influenced by Immanuel Kant. To sum up, Enlightenment formed the backbone of the dome of key ideas which were to become the foundation of sociological thought. This era also witnessed intense debates on the contesting models of the normative framework of society, state, and economy. Should individual rights and liberties precede the claim of the state over its citizens? What should be the role of the state vis-a-vis the state of the welfare society? What does modernity really mean, and what has been its impact on social relationships? To conclude, we can see how this epistemological extension from Kant, or let us say from earlier philosophies to the 19th century Europe emerged, and it was through these continuities that we see the formation of a new discipline called sociology. Auguste Comte, as we all know, tried to place sociology in the realm of physical sciences, or have similarities similar to that of physical sciences, and therefore this positivist approach was one of the first linkages to the discipline of sociology. However, over time, when Marx, Weber and Durkheim, the three so-called founding fathers of sociology, take over, we see that this particular underpinning of sociology related to social physics changes. Sociology now becomes a full-fledged science that studies society. It studies modernity, culture, political economy and the rest.